So hello everybody, welcome to today's Equal Experts talk online. My name is Sonia Peterson and I'm a Principal Consultant at Equal Experts. Today I'm introducing you to our fantastic guest speaker, Steve Smith. Steve is the head of Scala Services at Equal Experts and advises clients worldwide on leadership, delivery, operations and culture at scale. Working on several digital transformation projects or programs, he has played a pivotal role in implementing a continuous delivery and operation strategy for a high street retailer, and also led a team responsible for over 600 microservices for a UK government department with over 500 billion per annum revenue. His passion for helping organisations deliver at pace has led him to write multiple books, such as Measuring Continuous Delivery and Build Quality In. Before I hand over to Steve, just some general housekeeping. Throughout today's talk, you can add your questions using the Zoom Q&A function. Steve's going to be answering your questions at the end of the talk, so just be sure to keep an eye out on what questions are being asked and add vote for the questions that you'd like Steve to answer. Without further much ado, please give Steve a very warm welcome.
Thanks, Sonia. Good evening, everyone, or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name's Steve Smith, and I'm here to talk about You Build It, You Run It. Sounds great, but it won't work here because of complicated things we don't know how to solve, but could be solved if we made it more of a priority, but that wasn't quite as catchy a title. Okay, so I'm Steve. I'm the head of the Scale Service, as Sonia says, at Equal Experts. Equal Experts is a global network of expert technology consultants. I help organizations to deliver at pace with many teams and many services. I've listed some of my experiences here to give you an idea of what scale looks like to me. And I've written a couple of books in the past. They're on Lean Pub and Amazon. Please buy them if you haven't already. My children are hungry. So, where to begin? Your organization needs to survive and thrive in a world that's getting faster and messier every day. You need to build some digital services to deliver customer outcomes faster than ever before. Those services need to have weekly deploys or more, probably daily deploys now, 2 nines of availability or more, a time to repair in minutes, not hours, and a learning culture in which teams constantly generate insights and implement improvements. And all of these need to be accomplished together. It's not enough to have one on its own. You need to have all of them together for the long term. That's your new baseline. And there's a hard problem here. You've had a central operations team forever, haven't you? Deploying and supporting your foundational systems, the self-hosted COTS applications you've bought, the custom integrations you've built, on-premise or in the cloud. They're deployed monthly. Availability hovers around 2 nines if you're lucky. Time to repair is an hour or more. That just won't cut it for digital services. If you achieve this new baseline and deliver your customer outcomes sooner, your organization will succeed in the marketplace and it will be bunnies and meadows. If you don't achieve this baseline, you're going to lose out to your competition and the bunnies will be angry, I suppose. You need You Build It, You Run It. It's an operating model in which product teams build, deploy, operate, and support their own digital services. At least that's how Bethan Timmins and I describe it. It's underpinned by team empowerment, zero handoffs, and clear incentives. By that I mean a product manager is incentivized to prioritize operational features alongside product features because they're accountable for reliability as well as a feature set. There isn't an operations manager there to bail them out. And product team developers are incentivized to continually learn and build reliability into their own services because they're on call themselves for the things that they build. An application support team isn't around to bail them out. An easy way to think about this that we'll come back to later on is You Build It, You Run It is insurance for your customer outcomes. I've co-authored a whole playbook at Equal Experts about You Build It, You Run It with Bethan. It's a deep dive into the topic. It's available for free at this URL. You Build It, You Run It has an interesting history. In 2006, Amazon's CTO coined the term in an interview when he described how Amazon teams worked at the time. In the early 2010s, the DevOps cargo cultists talked about it. People said DevOps team when they meant a product team doing you build it, you run it. And in the late 2010s, the SRE cargo cultists talked about it. People said SRE team when what they meant was a bunch of sysadmins we've rebadged as SREs with a small pay bump, doing some deployments for you, and sometimes you get to do you build it, you run it if you're lucky. Really, it's an imperfect name for a really important thing. All right, how do you know when to do you build it, you run it, and also when not to do it? This operating model selector from the playbook can tell you. On the y-axis, you have financial exposure on failure. There are different relative levels from low to very high mapped onto availability targets. On the x-axis, you have product feature demand. There are relative levels again from low to very high, and they're mapped onto deployment targets. And you'll see the more financial exposure that you have, the more feature demand that you have, the more you need to move from yellow to blue and adopt you build it, you run it. What we're essentially saying here is that we don't believe it's possible to achieve weekly deployments or more, 2 nines of availability or more, and a learning culture together without adopting you build it, you run it. So use you build it, you run it for anything that genuinely needs 4 nines of availability. I don't see that very often, if ever. That's a huge investment in reliability engineering. Use you build it, you run it for digital services which need higher throughput and reliability. And use your operations team still for foundational systems which need lower throughput. You build it, you run it doesn't mean getting rid of your operations team. It can easily be a hybrid operating model. There's advice on this in the playbook, along with how a product manager can estimate the financial exposure and feature demand variables that you need. It's not as hard as it seems. What do deployments look like with you build it, you run it? Well, for digital services, on the top of this diagram, you've got product teams deploying and launching their own digital services. They report into change management afterwards through an automated audit trail. This gives you a higher deployment throughput. There's faster change approvals and deployments, a focus on outcomes over outputs, low knowledge synchronization costs, and no deployment scheduling conflicts. For foundational systems at the bottom of this diagram, it's the same as before. You've still got delivery teams building and testing changes, then they hand over to the change management team for change approvals, then over to the application support team for live deployments. What does instant response look like? For digital services, again at the top, you've got product teams monitoring and supporting their own services, which means L1 on call during working hours and out of hours. This gives you greater reliability and a powerful learning culture. There's faster alert acknowledgement, faster instant resolution, more informative telemetry refined from live traffic, and developers are incentivized to create an adaptive architecture that's able to gracefully degrade on failure. There's also higher quality insights from post-incident reviews, broader knowledge dissemination, and faster lead times to implementing post-incident actions. For foundational systems, at the bottom of this diagram, it's the same as before again. You've got an operations bridge team probably monitoring foundational systems and doing L1 on call. They hand over to an application support team for L2 instant response when necessary, and delivery teams are sometimes sucked in on best efforts for L3 for really hard technical problems to solve. You might have a single application support team doing L1 monitoring and L2 instant response together without an ops bridge team. That's totally fine. It's all the same. It all qualifies under ITIL. And in all cases, you've got operation enablers in the middle of this diagram, like your DBA team, your incident managers, your network admins, and your help desk. I like those teams. They're really important. Okay, so I've spoken with many organizations over the years in a bunch of different countries about switching from a central operations team to you build it, you run it. Here are some, not all, of the concerns I've heard from development managers, operations managers, heads of IT, and more. And usually, confusingly, these concerns are read right after they tell me how much they love the idea of developers on call in principle, but it could never work in practice because of these things. So we've got developers won't want to do it. It won't scale to lots of teams. Nobody would be accountable. There'd be no incident management. Developers would be firefighters, and we can't hire a DBA for every team. All right, number one, developers won't want to do it. They're divas, Steve, who just want to code in a corner. I've not spoken to them, but I know they won't do it. That sounds to me like we haven't given our developers what they need. First of all, do your developers understand the mission and how vital it is? Have you explained to them that without making these changes, your organization will fail to meet its goals and lose out to competitors? Next, have you actually asked them if they'd like to go on call and listen to their answers? I don't just mean hearing what they say, I mean hearing what they say, understanding what they're saying, talking with them afterwards, clarifying their concerns until you truly understand. And have you told people with concerns that you're going to put it right? Whatever problems you sign up to solve, make sure that you give it maximum effort and maximum transparency. There'll be some really tricky organizational problems to solve here. And in my experience, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Give your developers what they need. There's an increasing number of public surveys out there about on-call developers, which is great. There's a 2022 Atlassian survey of 2,000 developers in 4 different countries, and it shows 59% of developers are on call, and there's a strong correlation between you build it, you run it, and job satisfaction, despite more context switching. Surveys like these often mention similar adoption concerns from developers, and the number one concern is impact on personal life. There's a good quote in the Instant.io survey here. Not being able to live life as usual, no drinking, no long bike rides, having to carry a computer everywhere. I'm sure those of us here today who've been on call before can relate to these problems. I've been on call at a couple of different customers of Equal Experts, and I remember stressing about 4G reception in cinemas, worrying about being called when I was driving somewhere, changing weekend plans with my family so I could be near home and near my broadband connection. It all adds up. So it's important to acknowledge the impact of on-call on personal lives. And you can start by doing that by sharing the data you have on incident frequency, incident duration, and how often incidents happen in working hours versus out of hours. Reassure people that there won't be a call out every day for the rest of their lives. It's important to bear in mind they might not have been on call before, and their only knowledge of it might be a prior company where an operations team were managing a whole bunch of foundational systems on premise with some really unreliable infrastructure that constantly gave out alerts. You need to create time and space for on-call onboarding and training. Give people confidence that they'll go on call with all the organizational knowledge that they'll need. Empower them to prioritize failure design alongside product features. Let them protect their digital services from brittle downstream dependencies with a cache, back pressure queuing, circuit breakers, whatever they think is best. And compensate them for the impact on their personal lives. This one's super important. Pay them to be on call, not just for call outs. Pay them more on weekends than weekday evenings. On call is a social sacrifice. If you don't appreciate that, someone else will. If you don't pay your people, someone else will. I've seen it happen before. The 2019 on-call survey here showed a lot of variation in payment models used by different organizations. So do your research and figure out a payment model that fits your organizational context. There isn't a right answer. There isn't a magic number that everyone should be using. You have to figure out what's best for you. All right, number 2. It won't scale to lots of teams. This one's my favorite. We'll have 20 teams and 20 people on call, Steve. You can't possibly understand. How could that ever be cheaper than one operations analyst trapped in a cupboard on St. Helena? The British exiled Napoleon there, Steve. It's a really cheap island. That sounds to me a bit like you haven't figured out how to balance your financial exposure and on-call costs. Have you thought about an operating model as multi-cost insurance for customer outcomes? Recognize that different insurance policies offer different levels of protection at different premiums. And the more valuable the contents of your home, the higher the premium for your house insurance. In other words, come to terms with the run cost of you build it, you run it being a bit higher than a central operations team. And if you measure opportunity costs and revenue protection as well, you'll see that they are much improved compared to a central operations team, and it's well worth it. Plus, it's easy to optimize your setup with developers on call so that you don't have linear run costs, so that adding a team doesn't necessarily mean adding another person on call. Have you mapped out all of your teams, their services, and estimated how much money per minute flows through each service? The best way to get started is to dig up business cases and revenue estimates. Use those numbers at first, just to get yourself going, and then refine them over time with live telemetry and the financial impact of actual incidents. And have you let go of this idea that everything everywhere must always be on? It's not true. You'll have a few services that are critical with a lot of money flowing through them day and night. You'll have a lot of services that are important. They'll have a lot of money flowing through them in the daytime, but not so much at nighttime. And you'll have some services that aren't important. They don't have much money flowing through them in the daytime and next to nothing at nighttime. You can plan around this. If you've got 20 teams and 20 people on call, you're doing it wrong. Just contact me and I want to help you fix it. It doesn't need to be that way. All right, balance exposure and financial costs. Here's one way to do it. There are other ways. Here's a home improvement retailer I visited a while ago. Let's say it was in, I don't know, South Africa, because I can eat seafood in South Africa and not get sick. They've got a search team and a search domain, a store operations team and a store domain, and teams for outdoors, painting, and furniture services, all in a customer journeys domain. The furniture team alone has 2 services because, I don't know, South African garden furniture is more complicated. It's okay. I'm a convincing expert in South African retail for the next 60 seconds at least. Here, all teams are on call during working hours for their own services. You can see that on the left of the diagram. This incentivizes developers to design for failure and implement operational features like business metrics for monitoring dashboards. Out of hours is where it changes from you build it, you run it as you might imagine it. Out of hours, it varies by financial exposure. The store ops service has low exposure, 2 nines of availability, which means no developers on call out of hours, not even an operations team. This is really crucial. It pushes developers to still invest in operational features so they don't have to deal with overnight incidents when they start work the following morning. The customer journeys services all have a medium exposure, 2.5 nines of availability on the y-axis. So the outdoors, painting, and furniture teams rotate 1 developer on call from their 3 teams for their combined 4 services at night. Using product domains as affinity groupings encourages a focus on outcomes and a low cognitive load. And the search service has a high exposure, 3 nines of availability, so a developer is on call from the team to ensure the fastest possible time to restore. This isn't a perfect model, but it's a model that works, and it can work well. Like I said, there are other ways to do it, but this hopefully disabuses people from this fantasy that 20 teams means 20 people on call. All right, number 3, nobody would be accountable. It'd be the Wild West, Steve. We must have 1 operations manager to rule them all, 1 throat to choke, 1 person on the hook for a load of stuff they can't possibly understand. That sounds a little bit like you haven't tried trusting your people to do the right thing. Have you explained to your leadership, managers, teams, why shifting accountabilities is tied to the overall mission? Help people to understand that governance is important, it powers incentives, and that without making teams accountable for customer outcomes, you won't be able to succeed. Have you informed your senior leadership that a key benefit here would be product managers mapping customer outcomes onto operational features, not just product features? Give some examples like monitoring dashboards, visualization of on-call budgets, developers being given time to re-architect their services for a smaller blast radius on failure. And have you described to your teams how their new accountabilities and responsibilities will work day to day? Ask your developers to lend their technical know-how to your product managers in selecting availability targets, selecting deployment targets, and tracking on-call costs so that individuals don't feel overwhelmed. Trust your people to do the right thing. Split accountabilities between different people and devolve responsibilities down to their teams. Somewhere in your organization, there's probably a RACI model lurking. That means a model showing who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed when stuff happens in different categories. Here's an example model I'd expect to see for you build it, you run it governance in the reliability category. So let's assume your organization has a head of operations, a head of product, and a head of delivery. This will be a nice comeback for when someone complains afterwards that this talk was too simplistic and the examples were too contrived. For digital services, the person paying for the product team is accountable for reliability and run cost, as well as the feature set. If it's a new proposition, it's funded by your head of product, so they're accountable. If it's a technology upgrade, that dreaded word replatforming, it's funded by your head of delivery, so they're accountable. Product teams are responsible for reliability either way, and their incentives are strong. Product managers and developers alike will consider risk tolerance and engineering effort when choosing availability targets, because they won't want to spend more than necessary in the on-call budget, because it's their budget now and they can't blow it for the year. And for foundational systems, it's all the same as before. Your operations manager is still accountable for reliability, and your application team is still responsible. So we've got no disruption there. Now, full disclosure, it's tough to transfer accountabilities like this, and it's tough to split one line item in one OPEX budget into two line items in two different CAPEX budgets. It's tough, and it's the right thing to do. Okay, number 4. There'd be no incident management. Developers would abandon incidents and go back to sleep, Steve, if they couldn't fix it themselves. We'd have enormous chain reactions of incidents that nobody would know about. We'd bankrupt ourselves while we slept peacefully in our own beds. That sounds like you haven't made incident management self-service yet. Let's assume you've got at least one incident manager in your organization, or at least one person who understands how incident management is supposed to work for internal compliance. Incident managers are super useful. They've got lots of organizational knowledge, communication pathways, and stakeholder management skills that come in handy if you're dealing with a major incident and substantial revenue loss. You know, when you can hear the money pouring away in your ears, when you're frantically trying to figure out the problem and implement a solution to fix the problem, you don't really want to be sending out emails every 15 minutes to your senior leaders saying, we're still working on it. Have you connected your incident managers with your developers? Make sure they know each other by name, that they appreciate their codependency, and they have clear expectations of one another. You want your developers to know they can call an incident manager for help when an incident is incurring a significant financial loss and/or the blast radius goes beyond their own digital services. You want your incident managers to trust your developers, to phone them when the going gets tough, and to wade in and help out. Have you mapped out your incident management process as is and as is intended? Identify all the manual and semi-automated activities you currently have, all the outdated spreadsheets in use, and all the time-consuming handoffs between different teams, and plan to eliminate them. Buy some SaaS if necessary. PagerDuty is really good, and it has bi-directional sync with instant tracking systems like ServiceNow. Incident managers and auditors just love those automated ticket updates. And have you run some chaos days? You don't need to go all Netflix and create some state-of-the-art, fully automated magic monkey in a box that simulates the loss of an entire AWS region when you snap your fingers. You can use a test environment. You can rely on human expertise, not 100% automation. You can have your most experienced developers act as chaos agents to think creatively and simulate unusual failure scenarios. You'll learn a lot from this. Use this as a foundation for everyone to gradually build up their confidence in self-service incident management. All right, automate self-service incident management. Here's one way to do it. There are others, you know the drill. So let's pretend we're a broadband telco in Luxembourg, because I went to Luxembourg once and gate crashed a party I shouldn't have been at. At this telco, we used to have alerts directed to an OpsBridge team, an L1 operations analyst trapped in a cupboard on St. Helena. If you don't know where it is, look it up. Did you know the British exiled Napoleon there once? And our Faithful operations analysts received the alert. They looked at an outdated spreadsheet of people on call back in Luxembourg. They contacted the incident manager in Luxembourg to coordinate incident response. And then they frantically phoned people until someone answered, acknowledged the call, and got on with fixing the problem. You've lost 5, 10, 15 minutes in your incident response right there. Now, that process wouldn't scale up for you build it, you run it, obviously. But the role played by your incident manager of coordination and communication, that's vital. So here's what self-service incident management can look like. An automated alert is routed into an incident response platform like PagerDuty, and it's configured to automatically create a ticket in the ticketing system, maybe ServiceNow. Everyone loves ServiceNow. Connect the alert to a service, which connects the service to a team and its on-call schedule and phones the current person on call in the schedule, and creates an instant channel in the collaboration platform, maybe Slack. Hopefully the channel name has the incident ID in it. That'd be really nice for discoverability. Then people can silently follow along with the incident response and learn. The on-call developer acknowledges the alert in the collaboration platform or on their phone, and both the incident response platform and ticketing system are magically updated, as happens with any future updates during the incident. But there's a special step here. We've also configured an on-call schedule for our incident managers in the incident response platform. And if the on-call developer needs their help, they just have to add that team to the incident, and the on-call incident manager is immediately woken up to a wealth of information in the ticketing system about the current situation and who the on-call developer is that's looking for assistance and that they need to contact. This isn't hard to do in terms of implementation. The trick is to get your incident managers and developers on the same page and secure some budget for a SaaS incident response platform. A good rule of thumb is that incident response should not involve any spreadsheets anywhere. If you've got rid of all the spreadsheets, you're doing well. All right, number 5, developers would be firefighters. Developers would spend all their time on BAU maintenance work, Steve. They'd be configuring things, provisioning things, fixing things all the time instead of creating things. Our ability to churn out new features to customers would grind to a halt. They'd leave us for our competitors. You know, the one with Kate Winslet doing their TV adverts. They've got a really catchy jingle this year. When I listen to this concern, not the fictional ranting and raving that's never actually happened, the actual concern about BAU, the thing that always comes across to me is, it sounds like you're frightened of BAU, but you're not measuring it, let alone eliminating it. I hear the term BAU an awful lot. It's usually a synonym for unplanned maintenance work. So it includes things like working on code review feedback, upgrading infrastructure capacity, fixing defects, patching security flaws, improving telemetry, implementing support tickets, repairing broken builds, resolving live incidents, fixing intermittent tests. You know, there's much more. Have you learned to actually manage unplanned work just like planned work? Insist that teams track BAU work in your ticketing system and visualize them on your board just like planned work for any work item that lasts longer than half a day as a rule of thumb. If it's less than half a day, don't worry about creating a ticket. If it's more than that, create a ticket, put it in the system, treat it like any other bit of work. Tracking and prioritizing BAU work items alongside planned product features from a single backlog makes it easier for a product manager to understand the work as done and to make informed decisions about what to work on next. Have you visualized per team rework rate? Make sure BAU tickets in your ticketing system are labeled as BAU so they can be queried alongside feature tickets. That makes it easy to calculate the percentage of time spent each week on unplanned work, and that's your rework rate. Thanks to the Accelerate book by Dr. Nicole Forsgren and others, it's the de facto industry measure for unplanned maintenance work, and it's a great proxy measure for technical quality. The lower your rework rate, the higher the quality of the software that you're building. Track rework rate once per week over many months, and you'll be able to spot trends in it. Teams will better understand how it impacts their ability to deliver planned features on time. They'll gradually become attuned to that all-important culture of continuous improvement, of finding a small problem and permanently fixing it, not just putting a temporary band-aid on it before it becomes a big problem. Have you built paved roads? And I don't mean a platform, Everyone's got a platform. Everyone tells me they've got a platform. Even when they don't have a platform, they say they've got a platform. And I don't like to say they think they've got a platform, but they don't have a platform because they don't want to hurt their feelings. I mean paved roads. I mean fully automated user journeys to boost developer experience that are self-service. You just push a button and your service is fully equipped with build jobs, monitoring dashboards, production alerts, on-call schedules. Paved roads are BAU killers. I don't think an organization can deliver at scale with many teams, many services without paved roads, because otherwise there will be a lot of BAU fires to fight. All right, measure and eliminate BAU work. Here's an example from an e-commerce company I visited a couple of years ago. Let's say it was Trinidad, because I know a good rum shack in Port of Spain. This data is over a 2-year period. We've got a foundational system in blue. It has a delivery team making changes and a central operations team looking after it. We've also got a digital service in yellow. It's owned by a product team doing you build it, you run it. Okay, let's start on the left with deployment interval. That's the number of days between live releases. The digital service averages daily deployments every day for a 2-year period, which is mighty impressive. Deploys of the foundational system vary from fortnightly to monthly to once every 6 weeks. There's no predictability here. And there are gaps in deploys. And yes, you've guessed it, the gaps are due to change freezes. Everyone's favorite thing. I love change freezes. I miss the old days when we had many more of them. All right, on the right-hand side, we've got our time to restore data. That's the time it takes to resolve an incident and restore live availability for customers. The digital service has few incidents. One takes an hour to resolve, the others hover at 30 minutes or less. The foundational system has more incidents. They last for much longer. They cause more of a revenue loss. Some incidents are over 3 hours long, which is pretty scary. Now let's move to the middle with rework rate data. That's the percentage of time developers handled unplanned work and interruptions. You'll see that for the foundational system, it was very high. Sometimes 75% of time was spent dealing with defects, infrastructure problems, misconfigurations, intermittent tests, etc. For the digital service, it was really low, around 10%. And there's a strong, obvious correlation here with more frequent deploys and fewer shorter incidents and a low rework rate. We have a question coming from Susanna. Thank you, Susanna, asking about what a foundational system is. So to recap on that, a foundational system is something that you are hosting yourself, whether it's self-hosted COTS or a self-hosted custom integration that you've built. It could be on-prem or it could be in the cloud. But the key thing really is that it's okay to have lower throughput with a foundational system. Its time to market is quite slow. It's okay to deploy once a month. It's okay to deploy once a fortnight, and everything will be fine. Now, what's interesting here, when you look at this data, is the story that it tells, because what's interesting here is what the digital service team didn't have. They built their digital service using cloud-based self-service paved roads built elsewhere in their organization. So most of their workflows were fast and error-free. They had very few configuration issues or infrastructure problems. They practiced pair programming, so they didn't need additional time to implement code review feedback. It was happening continuously. They used free amigos, so their tester was embedded in development, and the defect rate was low. They were on call themselves, so they redesigned microservices after live incidents to minimize future impact. The foundational system team couldn't do all of these. Their monolith was on premise, so some infrastructure problems were inevitable, but they could have done some of them. What really set these teams apart was the digital service team did you build it, you run it, and they committed to measuring and eliminating their BAU maintenance work because they felt the pain of it and they were empowered to actually do something about it. The operations team looking after the foundational system here, certainly they felt the pain of the BAU maintenance work, but they were unable to make changes without the delivery team doing it for them, and they were often prioritized to do something else instead. Okay, number 6 of 6. We can't hire a DBA for every team. DBAs are so expensive, Steve. They're so hard to find. We can't embed them in teams. They'd have nobody to talk SQL with. The last time a developer ran a query here, the database crashed. We've only got 3 DBAs. They've been here for years. I don't know their names. I'll call one of them Katie. I hope that's her real name. This sounds a little bit like you haven't made repeatable specialist tasks self-service yet. I mean, this concern isn't really about DBAs. It's about any small central team of specialists acting as operational enablers. At the start of the talk, when I talked about what you build it, you run it looks like in terms of incident response, I mentioned DBAs, network admins. You could also include operability engineers or InfoSec analysts, and I'm sure there are others. Have you understood that this idea of hiring a DBA for every team isn't you build it, you run it? Think of cross-functional product teams building and running their own digital services, but nowhere does it say you must hire a DBA for every team, you must jam a network admin into every team, you must force a DevOps engineer into every team, even though nobody can explain what DevOps is, even if you put a gun to their head. It's a logical extreme that's unnecessary. And have you rejected embedding specialists in teams? Discard this idea of hiring loads more DBAs and putting them into product teams. Look, I get it. Developers don't have DBA skills and they're not going to have them. You don't want them debugging a live database with millions of rows of user data. And a central DBA team will see their workload increase as you add more product teams. Prioritization clashes, slow progress, DBA burnout, they're all possibilities. But there's a consistent scarcity of affordable DBAs in the marketplace. DBAs will end up being stretched across multiple teams. Their workloads will seesaw between nothing and everything, and they won't feel part of a tribe. They'll become lonely. Tom Clark gave a great talk on this at DevOps Enterprise Summit Europe in 2019 on how this affected the ITV common platform. You should check it out if you've not seen that video before. It's on YouTube. Have you automated repeatable specialist tasks? Map out the work your DBAs actually do. Automate away repeatable tasks. Push as much onto your cloud provider as possible and free up your DBAs to concentrate on one-off expertise requests. Follow the general continuous delivery principle of automate the tasks machines are good at so humans can concentrate on the tasks that they're good at and machines aren't so good at. Make repeatable specialist tasks self-service. Remove repetitive, manual, or semi-automated tasks from your DBAs. Here's an example mapping of the specialist tasks that I'd expect a DBA team to work on. The majority of work here does not need a DBA, it just needs a machine, and the permissions a DBA has, the live permissions that is, that should not be shared with developers. Let's start with repeatable, low-value tasks. Just offload these to your cloud provider and don't overthink it. The more toil you can push into a cloud-managed service, the better. For example, you might have an on-premise Postgres database with one or more DBAs acting as a babysitter. Hell, it might be running in the cloud as well. But lift and shift this into AWS Aurora. Let AWS do all the babysitting. If somebody mutters about the migration cost or the AWS bill, show them the TCO for hiring more DBAs, for hiring more babysitters. Always get your cloud provider to do your babysitting for you, wherever possible. Okay, next, repeatable, high-value tasks. Turn these into self-service, automated deployment pipelines for product teams to use themselves. The easy examples here are CRUD, like creating a database schema. DBAs don't need to do that themselves, but developers shouldn't have permission to do it themselves willy-nilly. So ensure your developers lend their expertise to your DBAs to create the deployment pipelines that you need, and make sure there's some decent monitoring on them. And finally, ad hoc high-value tasks. Now we're talking. I predict this is where your DBAs spend the least amount of their time today, and it's where they need to spend most of their time. Make sure your developers know they can reach out to DBAs for complicated database tasks that aren't repeatable and well beyond developer expertise. Debugging live database problems is a good one here. That's where DBAs shine. And the whole idea here is to take away the repeatable low-value tasks, the repeatable high-value tasks, so that DBAs can work here. Now, if you're still awake, you'll notice that this classification isn't tied to DBAs at all. You can apply it to network admins, InfoSec analysts, operability engineers, any small central team of operational enablers that you have. For example, you might have a network admins team that has some on-premise DNS networking and firewall rules. You should be lifting and shifting that into AWS Route 53. Again, get the cloud provider to do the babysitting for you. Now, full disclosure, these changes are hard and they can take time, but talented engineers will always find a way in my experience. What's more important is your DBAs might freak out at not doing these tasks anymore because it's what they've always done. Sit them down and explain this is about empowering them to help the entire organization with the really important stuff to unleash their full skill set, where their expertise really matters. This is where you solve your specialists at scale problem, not by running around in the street with a butterfly net, trying to catch more DBAs. So in my experience, these concerns all usually boil down to one concern that's kind of unspoken. We haven't done this before, Steve. And that sounds to me like we don't know how to get started in our organizational context. And that's totally okay. Like, change is hard. It's why companies like Equal Experts exist, to help your organization through some really difficult changes. You Build It, You Run It is a very different operating model to having a central operations team. It influences how you design teams, how you architect digital services, how you pay your engineers, how you manage governance, how you respond to incidents, and much more. The trick is to not try too much at once and make sure people know it's okay to make mistakes, to learn as they go along. Share the mission with people. Tell your entire organization you need to try a different operating model to deliver customer outcomes at a baseline you've never achieved before. Inject some urgency. It's all about survival. Pick a pilot team. Find a team that's well suited to trying You Build It, You Run It. A team with an influential product manager and empowered, motivated developers. A digital service with some downstream dependencies, but not too many, and not too many that are tightly coupled to like an entire ecosystem. So just like Goldilocks, you need to find a team and a service that's not too hot, not too cold, just right for an experiment. And you need to change the mindset. Make sure that people know it's all right to fail, to learn. All they have to do is to document their findings and share their progress with the rest of the organization. They're paving a road, let's say, for your other teams to follow when you're ready. And above everything else, just encourage people, stay positive and keep going. All right, so the takeaways for when you go back to work tomorrow. Give your developers what they need. Balance financial exposure and on-call costs. Trust your people to do the right thing. Make incident management self-service. Measure and eliminate BAU work. Make repeatable specialist tasks self-service. And remember, please, You Build It, You Run It is great, and it can work here, wherever here is. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve. So now we've got an opportunity to answer some questions. So just a reminder for everybody to add any questions that they have to the Zoom chat. We're going to be answering them in sort of the most voted questions. The first one we have is how do you approach conversations about on-call remuneration for developers?
Thanks. Okay, so this is hard. In general, anything involving money is hard, but I think being transparent about it is super important. Talking to people in groups rather than as individuals is important. And being clear that there's a budget available, but it's not enormous, and you're just trying to try something out. The important thing is to treat everyone the same way. Don't pay me more than Sonia to be on call if we're on the same team and if we have the same skill set. And just be clear with people that they are going to be compensated for being on call, and that there's a whole bunch of different payment models out there. The 2019 on-call survey by Spike Lindsay and some other folks that I referenced back at the start of the presentation, there was like a whole realm of different payment models there. There was a majority leaning towards just paying people a flat rate, but what that number actually is really depends on your company. Like that, there's not really a magic number, and finding the magic number isn't the goal. What's important is that people recognize that they are being compensated adequately for the disruption to their personal life. My big concern always is that people are only paid for call outs, not for being on standby, when it's standby that's the thing that causes the most disruption to your personal life. Like that phrase I used earlier on call as a social sacrifice. I really like that. I'm going to keep using that.
Perfect. Thanks. And the next question we have on a similar note is, what do you do when only a couple of people on the team want to do on call?
Yeah, so this is an upcoming blog post on equalexperts.com from Bethan and myself. There's some stuff in our playbook about this as well. I mean, really, this is a problem that your operations team, your application support team, they've already got through this. I've certainly seen application support teams before where there's like 2 people on call from a team of 4. Some people won't be able to do on call for personal reasons, maybe for health reasons, and that needs to be respected. But if you've got less than 3 people on call, I'm a bit concerned about burnout there. I think that it's important that people take at least a week on, a week off, and that people know that it's okay to say, like, I can't keep doing this. We need to find more people to do this. It might be necessary to look at bringing more people into the team. It might be necessary to look at the kind of product domain rota I talked about and sharing 2 services between 2 teams and just having one person on call for them at night to try and have a bit more capacity. But again, the priority always has to be to respect people's different positions in life and to protect against burnout, which is a concern I think we all have in this new remote working world we're living in.
Perfect. The next one we have is, how do we address pushback from developers when it comes to infrastructure tech stack expertise, e.g. performance tuning of DBs, messaging bus, managing SaaS platform, etc.?
Okay, that's a great question. And I can see that a colleague of mine, Adam Hansrod's given a fantastic answer that I'll add. He's talked about running chaos days, specialist topic brown bag sessions, education, training, giving people the space to learn more and to teach others. That's a great answer. I'll add a little bit more on that. When it comes to something like, I've already talked about with performance tuning of a database. Leave that to your DBAs, okay? And don't embed them into product teams. Have a small team of DBAs somewhere that are doing the performance tuning. And by performance tuning, I mean something like index or something that's actually part of a database schema. The actual database itself, push that onto the cloud provider. Do not do that yourself. Okay, those days are gone. With a messaging bus, again, I'd really try to run that as a cloud managed service. I'd put that in, if you're on GCP, I'd put that into PubSub like straight away. And again, I'd put that application tuning onto the teams. And as Adam said here as an answer, like run some specialist brown bag sessions and share knowledge between teams on how to really extract the most out of PubSub at the service level. When it comes to like managing a SaaS platform, like that's pretty tricky. If you've got something like PagerDuty, I don't think you can really justify paying people to be like a PagerDuty team. You might have some different people with expertise in PagerDuty in different teams that form some kind of loose community. Maybe they've got a channel in Slack or Teams where you can come in and ask PagerDuty questions. That's something that I've seen work quite well at some different Equal Experts customers.
Perfect. The next question we have is, can you do a small scale experiment within a customer domain to show them that you build it, you run it, works? What is the time frame, and would the metrics measurements be the same?
That's a good free question one. Okay, so can you do a small scale experiment within a customer's domain to show them that you build it, you run it, works? Yes, I think you can. I think you can find that pilot team in a pilot service. There's a really tricky trade-off here, right? Because you don't want to think of like a Mickey Mouse service, because if you do that with something that has no dependencies and is brand new, then there'll be a lot of skepticism from your ops folks and from your developers. They'll sit there and say, well, this thing isn't hard. The moment you try to do something hard, then it's going to be very different. So this is what I mean about finding a Goldilocks, like within your own organizational context, what's like the maximum amount of time you can run an experiment for before people freak out a little bit? Is it maybe 1 month, 2 months, 3 months? I would certainly look to run a you-build it, you run it experiment for at least, I'm going to say 3 months. I'm making this up. Yeah, I'm going to say 3 months of actually having a developer team on call and learning from their service, deploying all the time, because then you'll get some really solid data out of it. And I don't just mean the quantitative data on things like deployment interval and rework rate and time to restore from incidents. I also mean qualitative feedback from developers. I would like to think that after 3 months, you're starting to see your people reporting similar feedback to that Atlassian survey, where developers are saying, yes, there's more context switching. Yes, I have more to do, but I do enjoy my job now because I understand the mission and we're more in control of our own destiny. So I definitely would have a time frame of at least 3 months, and the metrics measurements would be the same.
Perfect. And we've just got about 5 minutes left, so we probably have time for one or two more questions.
Can we do the next one, please, from Andy? Yeah, because I really like that question.
Cool, perfect. Would the maturity of the product mean that you would consider moving from you build it, you run it to an ops model? For example, a very mature product which is having lower investment.
So that's a great question. And it's kind of like lurking around the idea of like maintenance mode, which is something I really dislike as a concept. If we've been running for something with you build it, you run it for a while, there's a lack of money to fund new features. Should it move backwards from you build it, you run it to the operations team because feature demand is slowing down? And my answer to that always is no. It should stay with a product team. But what you can do is shrink product teams, transfer product services around. I worked with a retailer a while ago, for example. They had a whole loyalty program of like 5 different teams. One in the loyalty program, one did vouchers, one did rewards, one did know your customer. I forget the other 2. And as those services reached a point where the CapEx budget for funding dried up, those services were transferred into one team, the vouchers team, which then renamed themselves as the sole loyalty team. So the other teams went off to do other stuff in different domains, but there was always one long-lived team per domain that looked after all the services in that domain. So the advantage of that is that all the business knowledge about those services remains in at least one product team of developers. And then when the time is right to fund more work in that space, you can expand that team again if you wish. I did a blog on this a while ago on stevesmith.tech about why maintenance mode is bad. At some point, we'll do something on equalexperts.com and talk more about it. I mean, when you get to that point, I think it's a really nice problem to have, but I don't think it's ever a good idea to hand over something from a product team back into an operations team if feature demand slows down. I think we can do better than that.
Perfect. And I think we've got one more question, time for one more question, Steve. I'm not too sure which one you'd prefer to answer. They're both quite interesting. One from Sylvia, one from Samir.
How do you? Okay, I'll try and do both really fast. So Samir, how do we address this where specialist knowledge comes in? Like front-end engineer might not have worked with back-end systems during on-call. They might not be able to contribute as much as a back-end engineer would. Samir, that's a great question. You can also add testers into that, right, as well. Like, I like testers being on call. It really comes down to like the quality of the run books and how closely people work together. What you should really avoid is having like a separate front-end team and a separate back-end team. And even within a product team, you should try to find some opportunities for front-end and back-end engineers to occasionally work together, occasionally share knowledge. And it helps if those people know that eventually, when the service goes live, they're going to be on call together. So then people will naturally, out of their own self-preservation, like try to find a bit of time to learn from one another. But again, it comes back to run books, like great monitoring, and like some step-by-step guidance on what to do if there's a problem. And ultimately, if I'm a back-end engineer and I'm on call, I can call a front-end engineer out of the blue if they're on my team and they've given their consent on the quiet to be contacted, and maybe they'll be compensated with time off in lieu afterwards. Sylvia's question, very fast. What advice would you give for teams moving to you build it, you run it, where the build team doesn't have permission or access to deploy or investigate, and the organization is keen to move to you build it, you run it, but not keen on giving the teams the access permissions they need? Well, Sylvia, I'd come back there to the mission, and I talk about how can we achieve this mission if we're not going to trust our people to do the right thing. I know that's a really easy answer, but it really does come back to here's a hard thing that we're trying to do. And if we aren't going to give people the access rights that they need, then we simply can't achieve this. I'd really paint it in those stark terms, because that's a really key test, I think, for You Build It, You Run It.
Perfect. We might have time for one more question that's quickly popped up. Sorry.
Don't apologize. That's a good question. I don't see any more questions. I think we're done, Sonia.
Oh, okay. It was from Samir. The concept works very well and promotes.
Yep, just did that one.
Oh, okay. Perfect. That's all of them.
That was good. Thanks, Sonia. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time today.